Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Performance Talk. My name is Yul Gordon. My partner today is on another mission, but he'll be back with us in an episode or two. Today, our guest is Sarah. Say your last name for me.
I pronounce it Trifogli.
Trifogli.
Yeah. Just as it's spelt. I will get many variations of that, though.
Yeah, I was about to give you a variation, so that's why I always ask first.
I just accept whatever comes out these days.
Well, you see my first name, and I get a world of stuff that comes at me, and I just go yes, because if at some point, if someone gives it a shot, or if they ask, then I feel no disrespect.
Absolutely, I agree.
But so we always like to start off the show with our guests telling us a little bit about themselves. So tell me a little bit about you, how you got into why you chose physio, and then how you focused it and why you focused it on the performance aspect.
Well, I'm from Australia, so I live in New South Wales in Australia. I grew up in a regional country town, so I grew up playing sport, and that was the one thing that I loved over everything else. I played everything, and I think growing up I just had this real talent for sport performance that you don't. One of those high achiever kids that you don't really realize how tough life can be until you become an adult and have to figure it out yourself.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, so I had a lot more fun playing sport than being in the classroom, and I knew that I wanted to do something related to sport when I graduated. So I ended up starting in a nutrition course that I didn't love, and I dropped out, and I found myself doing personal training for a while, and a lot of the mentors that I had back then were exercise physiologists, and I was quite inspired by what they knew. So I continued my journey into sport and exercise science as my undergraduate. And it was through there that my mentors were strength and conditioning coaches. So I developed this passion then for more high performance sport based education. So under the guidance of Dr. Stephen Bird and Dr. Eric Drinkwater, that are two of my big mentors from that time period, I became a strength and conditioning coach.
Yep, Stephen is a friend of the show.
Hey, there you go. He's a friend of everyone, I think, that man.
Good guy.
Yeah, and so I was coaching pre-elite youth athletes out in Bathurst, which is the Western Region Academy of Sport. We won a few big awards in that program, which was quite beneficial, and I just working in that area for a while, I just realised I wanted to be able to do more, and that meant being able to assess and diagnose athletes as opposed to just doing their performance management.
Okay.
So I then went into a doctor of physiotherapy. So my target on performance is just to do with all of my skills combined, really. So I'm actually in the process now of finishing my sports nutrition course, and that was just to add another element of what I could offer athletes overall.
Okay, so are you working with an organization or team now, or are you an independent contractor?
I contract independently, but I have for the last couple of years. I've just actually finished up now for other reasons, but I have been working with Softball New South Wales and doing little bits and pieces with Softball Australia over the last 3 years. And then outside of that, I do have patients that will come into my clinic that are elite athletes as well. So a few powerlifters. I compete in powerlifting myself, so I know that community quite well. I've got a few elite ultimate frisbee players. I've got a few elite runners. So they come from all angles.
Okay, so understanding and with our audience is consists of athletes, old or young, and I'll say seasoned professionals, and academics and other folks. It's everybody. We've heard from everybody in the world of performance. So tell me, because you have kind of an eclectic background and path and how you got to sport and those kind of things, starting from a familiar starting point for a lot of folks in exercise science and sport and strength and conditioning. But, you went off to and got a doctorate in physio. Your undergrad work was in exercise science almost. You started in nutrition. Tell me why you felt like it was important, and you still do.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm hearing you right, you still think it's important to have at least a familiarity with everything in sport, even if you are specialized in one area.
It is really important to specialize in one area for most things. I think that's where you do your job the best, when you know everything. But performance alone is not, there's not just one component to performance. So it is multifaceted, and you have to understand that people are complex, and so much more goes into optimizing performance than just skill training or just strength training and I think I've noticed this a lot with sports like softball in Australia, that we are becoming better and better, but compared to countries like America or Japan, we don't rank our athletes the same way. We don't have the same athletic development that they've got in the bigger, more established areas of sport over there. And so it's been through my own journey as an athlete as well. And I think this is what makes it easy for me to try and chase those areas of education, is knowing where I've lacked myself, with training performance and understanding how nutrition impacts that, and how nutrition impacts recovery, and how rest impacts recovery, and how training to your set RPEs affects your ability to train later that week. All of these things come together, and I find that it's important for me to just understand the basics of everything to be able to know where to point athletes if I need more help as well. So I won't claim to be a nutrition expert, but I know enough that I know where to look if I need someone to find more answers.
That is, one of the things that I don't want to say everyone struggles with here in the States, but what some folks struggle here in the States with is understanding that you can't do everything. Being a nutritionist is a full-time job.
Absolutely.
Being a physio is a full-time job. Being a strength and conditioning coach is a full-time job.
Yeah.
But if you educate yourself in those areas and you can speak with those other professionals, you can do more for the athletes and the organizations that you work for.
Absolutely.
Doesn't mean you're going to have two jobs, and you shouldn't have two jobs.
No, I often have about 6, but
yeah, exactly. I know how that goes too. When you go in and you think, oh, I'm going to be the physio. They don't have a strength and conditioning coach. Oh, why am I talking nutrition? But the good thing is you have the background in that, and you are able to communicate outside of your specialty.
Yeah.
If the athlete needs more than you can give them. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And it's that education for me in a lot of those areas is just my ability to see things at this point. So yes, my main job is as a physio, so managing injuries. But if I come across someone that needs rehab in a sport that, consists of running, and I know that they need a lot of single leg power, explosive power, and that sort of thing, that allows me to talk to a strength and conditioning coach and say, this is what I need modified in their training program in order to manage this injury. Or if I see that my athletes are not eating enough, I can recognize that. I can see that their protein intake's low, or I can see that their carbohydrate intake's low. I can monitor hydration, but having someone to then take over that job role as a nutritionist is also beneficial.
Right. What, let's talk about, because we're alluding to having the ability to collect data or recognize and assess. Let's talk about that a little bit. And in your realm, how important is data? and a
Very.
collection of data. Okay. So how much is too much? I always ask that question. How much is too
Yeah.
much? How much data is too much data?
Look, you can overdo it for sure, and it becomes, especially in a physio sense, if I'm asking my patients to keep an eye on when things hurt, sometimes I get them coming back with a notebook, and all of a sudden there's just been this excessive focus on pain, which is also not ideal.
Right. There becomes a psychological component comes in there as well.
Yeah. There's huge risk factors we know with that leads to things like chronic pain syndrome and anxiety and
Right.
things like that. So yes, we need to collect some data so that in situations like that, I can identify what the movement patterns are that cause pain and how we need to modify their activity levels. Again, depending on the sport and the coaching staff, some sports like my own with powerlifting, I do have a spreadsheet where we record a lot of performance-based data. So we train to RPEs, so that will be recorded. I will list the weight loads that we're using, as well as we're often tracking calories for being in a weight class.
Right.
And it can get very overwhelming. Sometimes you feel like you're living your life on a spreadsheet.
Right.
But that information is actually really useful.
I will agree with you that it's useful, but it's like changing a movement pattern. When is it appropriate? When is it not appropriate? And then when how important is posture and alignment? Let me just put it that way.
Yeah, it's not these days. It's not. The research has shown us that. So, again, I'm working in a field in all areas that are research-based.
Right.
So we have literature.
So when we talk about those two things, posture and alignment, there's a time when it is important, but like you said, there's also a time. Why are you changing the way that athlete is moving? If there's no pain, they've adapted to the way they move. There's no risk of, or there's very little risk of injury. So what's the purpose?
There is none.
No, there is. No. I agree.
There's a very big grey area, I think, that people forget exists. There can be really horrible technique and horrible performance, and then can be perfect technique. But there's a grey area that is acceptable. And when you look at movement mechanics, for example, everyone's squat is going to look different based on their hip structure and their limb lengths and just their dominance. Some people are very quad dominant, some people are very glute dominant. So how they squat is going to look different to the person on the platform next to them, but it's not wrong.
Even their ability to dorsiflex.
Correct. Yeah.
I mean, I run into that a lot. I have preached over the years, not as much today as I did in my past when I was really active, foot placement. But then I started understanding, okay, this female is longer limbed. She has some stiffness in her ankles, but she's not feeling pain. So why am I changing what she's doing if there's no injury or if there's no high probability of injury? Leave her alone. She's adapted to that form or technique, and to when we go in and start changing it, we usually mess stuff up.
Yeah. And as an example, again, I can use myself. I have a leg length discrepancy, as do 90% of the population, but mine is starting to borderline on that moderate degree. Okay. So 1.4 centimeters, I don't know what that is in your American
that's all
system.
Right. We can do centimeters.
Yeah, 1.4 centimeters in total. So 7 mil from my femur, 7 mil from my tibia. It's been measured on a bone scan. So we know that 90% of the population will have small leg length discrepancies, but it's not noticeable. I don't notice that from day to day. I don't wear any sort of heel lift or anything in my flat shoes,
Right.
but when I squat, I do feel lopsided. So I do wear an orthotic, and on one side I do have a heel lift that lifts me a little bit, but the body will adapt to whatever position you're in. So if you are someone that doesn't have great ankle dorsiflexion, you will adapt your squat pattern to suit what your body needs in that position. So my right quad is 2 centimeters bigger than my left quad because I'm naturally sinking off to the right side.
Right.
Being lopsided in my squat doesn't cause pain. It doesn't affect my performance, but naturally, unless I have an external aid, I will never be perfectly symmetrical. So I need to train my body to be crooked in a sense. And this, sorry, keep going.
No, I'm sorry. But most athletes' ability to adapt or compensate is extraordinary.
Yeah.
And they've done it. They've done it since they were that tall.
Yep.
And so to change it or to try to change it or to try to fix it is usually where we as professionals sometimes run into trouble.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
that ties my question back to data. So we get all these measurements and we get all this stuff, and what do we do with it?
Yeah, it depends on how elite that athlete is as well, and what you've got access to. So it was commonly asked of me to keep assessing some of these softball players over the past couple of years, but collecting that data was going nowhere. We weren't using it for anything. There was no additional training program that was put in place for them to then make any adjustments if needed. And you're working in a population of players that you'll find this with cricket players, and you'll find this in baseball players, but they're very, very one-side dominant sports.
Yes.
So any data that I'm going to get from your throwing dominant arm is not going to match your non-dominant arm, and that goes out the window for everything that we learn in physio school, where assess the sore shoulder based on the non-sore shoulder. We can't compare that data because their dominant shoulder will never match their non-dominant side.
Oh, right. Especially in baseball, softball, cricket, those even tennis with the racket swing.
Yep.
They're gonna have some measurements that you go,
Yeah. So collecting data on shoulder range of motion isn't really giving me a lot to work with in that short term. If there's an injury, and then we start to see there's changes that are happening in that range of motion that might imply that there's a joint injury, a labral injury, then we can start modifying. But yeah, consistently assessing that is not giving me any additional information.
As we continue to talk about, collecting that information, what to do with that information, and then when to discard that information. When do we say? Let me just say it this way: athletes hate unnecessary testing. I don't know about you, but back in the day when I was an athlete, to test things that weren't going to affect me in the sport, I was, what are we doing? I'm standing in line for an hour to do 3 tests. And what are we doing with that information?
Again, this is where you bring your professionals in, and a lot of sports that don't have the funding available just don't have the capacity to bring in professionals that know this. So if I'm looking at, and again, it's just because it's fresh, this is where I have been working in my space for the last couple of years, but with softball athletes, we can see again from the research that assessing their pull strength, and one of the easiest tests to do in a team where you've got a high volume of athletes is an inverted row. Do they have the strength to pull themselves up to a bar? Knowing that posterior shoulder strength is really important for the eccentric phase of a throw to reduce rotator cuff injuries. That information can be useful if I'm seeing that a bunch of my athletes don't have their own the strength to pull their own body weight up to a bar, but they're trying to throw with extreme power. On the other side, one of the main tests that continues to be done through these teams is a double leg broad jump. None of my athletes on that diamond are ever going to jump with both feet at the same time in a forward direction. So to me, that test, even though they're trying to look at leg power,
right,
that test is just wasting my time.
I've heard everything from, I don't know how familiar you are with American football.
I cannot understand it for the life of me.
Well, they're testing a lot of the athletes right now in what's called the combine this weekend.
Yes, I have heard of the combine. Yeah,
and they go through these tests, and for the life of me, they've been doing them for years, and I've talked to countless people in the sport. I'm not going to name them because I don't want to put anybody's name out there. And they say we don't pay any attention to that.
No.
Because it doesn't tell us how good of a football player they're going to be or how well physically they're going to do at their position. It tells us how well they will do at the drills that we assign them for that day. And that's it.
Yep.
So you have 200 young men going out and training for these drills and wasting valuable training time to run, a tenth of a second faster in a 40-yard dash. And then you put on 10 pounds of equipment and the whole scenario, the whole thing changes.
Yeah.
Or you're running through traffic where you have to change directions multiple times against somebody trying to tackle you. It's similar to the needs of that sport are similar to rugby.
Yep.
So if you think about, a winger in rugby and a wide receiver in American football, similar demands from a sport perspective.
Yeah.
But there's other things that the rugby athlete needs that the American football player doesn't necessarily. And that is, you got to have a little bit higher cardiovascular capacity in rugby.
Yep.
But yet and still we test things that sometimes I just, now sport specific drills and stuff like that, that's all fine. That's up to the sport coach and those kind of things. But if you want a physical test to determine, how well an athlete might do, then you need to look at the demands of the sport.
Yeah, everything should be sport specific.
Yeah. So
absolutely.
So as we are, let's talk about the physio world and the strength coach world.
Yeah.
The differences you feel are there, where they're a lot alike, and maybe where they could come together better to serve the athlete.
Again, there's so much gray area in that, but
yep, on purpose.
Yeah. And look, it's kind of a world where I've found that there are some very big egos as well that you need to battle. And you've already touched on it before. There are a lot of big egos that don't know how to refer off either. They want to manage it themselves. In an ideal situation, your physio would be there just to assess, diagnose, and start the treatment of an injury, with the ability to hand over to a strength coach or a strength and conditioning coach or an exercise physiologist or someone that can then take on that exercise rehab in a much greater capacity and focus on that. And then touch base in terms of how that injury is progressing or improving.
So here in the States, we have an athletic trainer that's kind of between the physio and the strength coach. And you guys do a lot of, as the way it's set up, they have a big responsibility in return to play. So you have our physical therapist or physios will deal with the injury acutely. Management of that, I call it formal rehabilitation or short term recovery.
Yep.
Then the athletic trainer takes them and prepares them for the strength coach. Ideally, working out how that flows and who takes what when is still something I think we're working on over here. How does that flow with in your case? You don't have that middle person?
No. And depending on the sport, and again, the funding involved in a sport, your elite sports will have strength and conditioning coaches ready to go. But in a lot of your junior sports, they don't even have that. So that job role comes down to the physio. And depending on your background in physio, I've come from a sports science and strength and conditioning background, and being an athlete that trains to a periodized program. So I understand where to start in that area, but there are a lot of physios and a lot of other students that I went to school with that don't come from an exercise background, and this is where they're going to really struggle as a physio to then understand the very sport-specific components that are needed in
Right.
movement. So they'll assess the biomechanics of something from a pain perspective, but how does that now translate into rehab? And how
Right.
do you modify that for a very sport-specific movement? I think that is lacking in probably a lot of nations, really, where the physio knows a lot of injury stuff, but not enough about training. And the strength and conditioning coach knows a lot about training and performance, but not enough about injury management. So there should be we need to do a lot more to improve that.
Man, see, I always get I get a jumble of questions when I talk to people not in this country, being the United States, and kind of start getting a feel for what the challenges are, what the advantages are you may have, what the disadvantages are you may have, and I think there's a real advantage in the athletic training piece that we use.
Yeah.
But a disadvantage in the kind of closed door mentality that we may have a little bit of, where, okay, you do this, and then when they're done with that, you hand them completely off to the next person. And the person that had the athlete previously washes their hands. Okay, you need to see that person. And I think it's more of a, and I could be wrong, but I think it's more of it's like Jello. You might be all mixed together. You know what I mean? And you have to kind of work out that relationship. So talk to me, and this all sounds the same, but I'm asking these questions, this line of questions, because a lot of our listeners will ask, well, how do you work with this person, or how do you work with that person? So from your experience, how do you approach when you have to hand the athlete over or refer the athlete out somewhere? What's your approach to that? What steps do you take?
So I will, if there's a specific athlete with a specific problem,
Okay.
I will write a written referral and a report to the next professional. So that might be a GP. That I might be sending them back to the GP to then refer on to another specialist. Again, the way that our system in Australia works might be different to yours, but I can't just send a patient off to a sports physician without a GP referral. So I kind of have to go back to them. But I can definitely, I would put it in a written form and send off to a nutritionist or a strength and conditioning coach that this
do you
is
get
what
a
I'm
chance?
managing.
Do you get a chance to have a conversation with them, or talk to them, or meet with them?
Sometimes I do. It just
So it's
depends on the time. Yeah.
yeah, it's like it is over here. So it's a lot of times they're in house nowadays over here, in especially the larger organizations. But
Yep.
so when they're in house, they're working as a team already anyway.
Yeah.
But
And that's the ideal situation.
right,
If I had that environment, I would love to be working in a team where we were all face to face,
right,
and overseeing each other's work.
and you could hold up a flashcard of an athlete and say, "Hey, this athlete. These are the
Yeah,
things.
yeah,
These are the things we found. These are the things that the sport demands. This is what the coach thinks." And then you can put yours in there, and then next athlete. That would be ideal. Yes.
that would be ideal. The closest thing we really have from a physio perspective is working with workers' comp patients, where we jump on a case conference call with the physio and the doctor and the specialist and the case manager in regards to how that patient is returning to work. But
See, that's
it's not done as much, especially in sports that don't rank as highly in this country, that don't have that funding. It's
right. Boy, it
they can't afford to.
always seems to come back to funding, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And
I
I
mean,
can
it's
see both sides of it. Being the professional in one side, I don't want to be working 80-hour work weeks for free.
right.
So
Not a
obviously,
chance.
yeah, you want to be paid for what you're doing. But
Yeah.
at the same time, yeah, if you don't have the funding, that sport's going to suffer.
Yeah. The the holistic approach is, I think, around the world, and from people I've talked to from other countries, I think it's the idea is catching on. It's the
Yeah,
execution. I think everybody knows that, hey, it's better if we have a team of these people,
yeah,
and it's better if each of those heads has a couple of people to work with them.
yeah.
But we won't even talk about having a team and then a couple of people, because usually you are the couple of people,
Yes, yeah,
and
yeah.
and you're working with all the athletes. So okay, so that's pretty interesting. I think from a leadership perspective, how does your National Association of Strength and Conditioning, how does that factor into how the profession or the professions are growing over there? Sorry about that.
Look, I really think they should be.
I know
They should.
you have your own
Yeah.
professional conference, right?
Yes. Yep. Yep. The Australian
And
Physio Association.
right. So
Yeah.
so do you work closely? I guess a better way to ask that question is, does the association work closely with other associations when it comes to sport?
No.
Okay.
No. No. They're all fairly separate unities.
And we have those separate entities as well, which are very separate.
Yeah.
But each one of them has a sort of a sport component, if that
Yep.
makes sense. But we're still struggling kind of as as a performance entity to come all together.
Yeah.
Because I think everybody has their own idea. All right, so that's pretty interesting. So progressing from that to how much? Let me ask it this way: where is your profession as a physio? Where is it now when it pertains to sport, and where do you think it needs to go?
I look, if we could set up some sort of organization that was performance, that housed all of these different components, that would be fantastic.
It really would.
It would, yeah. We'll see elements of that at things like the Australian Institute of Sport or New South Wales Institute of Sport, where you've got professionals all under the same roof. But what you're saying is, yeah, the strength and conditioning body and the physio body, they don't really gel together outside of that. Where I'm going, I would like to be in an environment that was more inclusive with all of those different professions. Understandably, it may not necessarily just be a facility, though. I
Right.
think there needs to be some kind of an online community version where you are still in touch with other professionals from different sports. There's definitely a lot of room for improvement. in that sense. As I'm not sure how I can change that as an individual at this point, but
well, one of the reasons that we do this podcast is for professionals to have a platform and a voice to say things that are on their mind.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I hear a lot is what you just said, and it's I'm not sure as an individual how I can have an effect on that change. And that's a message to all of our governing bodies, from physio to strength and conditioning to nutrition, to all those governing bodies. That's a message to them that says, "Hey, you're leaving this big piece out." And while it is sports, and a lot of folks think of sport as just entertainment, there is a safety piece to taking care of athletes in that kind of environment. But also, if you want to look at it from the dollar sign or the performance side, there's also a great benefit there as well. The difference between now and then is, or now and the way it is, or the way we would like it to be, is that the power structure changes a little bit when you have to include more voices. You have to be able to set some things aside, like ego, like your own thought. I for a long time I thought that there was a way to do things. It was my way. But as I got older, now I'm an old guy, and I look back and I go, you know what? There's a whole lot of right ways to do things.
There is. I think that's quite common.
Yeah, and but like I said to a previous guest, as long as we're pushing the profession and the associated professions the same direction, then we can get there.
Yeah.
But it's going to take everybody pushing.
Yeah.
Someone else can't be pushing the opposite direction or sideways.
Exactly. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about your career, a little bit more about your career, because we started there.
Yeah.
And then we drifted, but that's okay.
Okay.
Let's come back to your career. So you started. Where did you start exactly?
Let's start. We won't worry about where I dropped out of nutrition to start with.
No, that's not a start. That's a start over.
Yeah. I started as a personal trainer. So I went to what we call TAFE over here, so a training institution, and just started with the basic Cert 3, Cert 4 level personal training certificates.
Is there educational requirement for those?
Yes. Yeah. So you need to be certified to be able to take a group exercise class, or then Cert 4 will be your personal trainer. So in order to coach someone face to face in the gym, you need to have that qualification. And it was a really good, those two courses in particular, so Cert 3, Cert 4, I think are just great educational courses for everyone. Just learning the basics of human movement and basic anatomy, I think, is really important for anyone to understand their own health. From there, I completed a diploma of fitness and a diploma of athlete support services. So that's where I started to really find that passion for the more elite athlete training as opposed to general population. That was all completed at TAFE. And then that's when I started my journey to uni.
So just for our listeners, and every now and again I have to remind them, uni is university or college.
College in your world, yeah.
Yeah, or college.
Yes.
So how is it? How was your journey into college? How did you feel about the process sometimes getting into college strength and conditioning or college performance, that world in the States is difficult, and it's solely based on, or can seem to be solely based on, who you know.
Oh, look, there's a big part of that in the physio world when you become a professional. Getting into uni here it doesn't need to be difficult. There's obviously our schooling system in year 12, which is our final senior year of high school. We sit what we call the HSC, so the higher school certificate, and from that you get a point score, which allows you to apply for university. The entry-level score for physio is really high. Okay. It's up there with medicine and things like that. So
as it should be.
Yeah, and you're right. The amount of education, I'm not a doctor, but I need to know about other medical conditions so that I can rule out an injury and send off for referral if I have to. But
and you have to be able to at least speak with the physician.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, if you don't understand a word he's saying, then
yeah. But we've got other options here as well. So if you don't get that score and you can't go into university or college straight from school, there are other options. I wasn't actually interested in going straight into physio. We do a year 10 work experience, and I went to a physio and saw a kneecap move and I fainted, and I thought it's not for me. I'll do something else. So by the time I actually went into my sports science degree, I started at the age of 22 or 23. So even that is what we'd class as a mature age entry level. And instead of using my marks, which I had high enough marks to go into sports science, they start to look at other prerequisites. So I had a background now in some sort of anatomy education, and that allowed me to get into that course. Getting into postgraduate, again, is probably similar as your system over there. You had to have your pre-training requirements, and for that science degree, but for someone, I could have another friend of mine now who has been doing law or something for their entire life and has just decided they want to become a physio. They can still enter into a uni system as a mature age student and follow that path.
So it sounds like when I think about the path for students here, it sounds like it's similar to a point. Then it kind of your requirements kind of are dictated more, with the same thing being that you got to have the right marks coming out of graduate school or your undergrad, or both really.
Both, yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. Then after that, your first job was where?
Oh, gosh. I actually started my own personal training business when I left my undergraduate degree. So I was just, working in gyms.
Okay, so now I'm sorry about that. Now I'm just kind of bouncing all over the place. But, having been someone who's spent most of my adult life in private practice, I've worked with some organizations and some teams, but as a contractor or a private practitioner, what was that like for you, and why do you think that was so important to start there? How did it help you?
Look, I can't even. We're going back about 12
That's all right.
years now.
When I think about it, I go back about 25.
I guess there is an appeal to be able to run your own business in your own way, with the flexibility, I guess, of working hours and locations and taking on the type of clientele that you want to work with. But I burnt myself out because
challenge, isn't it?
Yeah. You've got to learn how to set boundaries, and at that age, I didn't know what that looked like.
Yeah.
So
everybody wants to have their own business and do their own thing.
Yeah.
But when you do that, and I'm sure that's how you got burned out, but when you do that, you also work 24 hours a day.
Yep.
And you are the janitor, the bookkeeper.
Yep.
You're everything.
Yeah, you are.
And that part you don't see, but until you get into it.
Yeah,
And to make a living requires, I think, a lot more stamina than any of us who have gone that way ever realized in the beginning.
yeah. And you do your degree or you do your courses as a professional in an area. So I had the education to know how to train people, but that course didn't include business admin skills that I needed to run the business side
Yeah.
of that.
Accounting,
Yeah.
profit and loss,
Yep.
bookkeeping, supply and demand.
Yep.
None of
Yep.
that.
All of it. Yeah.
None of that. I trust me. I know your pain from way back when. Okay, so what's next for you?
Next, actually, I'm about to hit a big transition period. I'm packing up and moving down to Canberra in a month.
Okay,
So I've already got a. Sorry?
how big of a move is that geographically?
Sorry, you just cut out again.
No, geographically, how big of a move is that? I don't think folks understand the size of
It's about a 3.5 hour drive away.
Okay.
So Canberra is obviously the capital of Australia. It's its own little territory, but it's kind of inside New South Wales's border. So
Okay.
it's not the furthest move, but
Yeah.
it is a big change.
Okay. That's fine.
So I do have a job lined up there in a physio clinic. It is a little bit bigger than where I'm coming from, and sort of what we've already touched on. This place does have a bit more of a team environment there. So I will be working alongside hand physios and women's health physios and exercise physiologists. And there is a big sport component in there as well. So Canberra houses the Australian Institute of Sport, so there will be a lot of other high elite level athletes down in that area.
Okay.
In terms of, as I said, I've just finished up with Softball New South Wales for a number of reasons, but I do know the Australian softball community, so whether or not that means I start to pick up other state physio work on the side, I'm not sure yet, but I'm also, as we talk about performance, at some stage you also need to prioritise what you need, and at this stage I need to pull back a little bit. I have been burning the candle from both ends for a long time.
Yeah. Let's
And
yeah.
as much as
As
I love the elite sport, I'm keen to just not do it for a while now.
we had a strength conditioning coach from the U.S. of course talk to us about getting yourself to a good healthy state, and this is a strength coach in a major university. Getting yourself healthy, understanding the importance of having good finances, understanding the importance of relationship outside of what you're doing. All things I think in the performance realm are easy to lose. In the performance world, and athletes are highly focused. The coaches are focused. So you're going 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. With multiple athletes, taking calls at midnight. Just everything. And what a lot of people don't understand is say, oh, you work with university athletes or national team athletes or whatever. That's got to be rewarding. Yes, it is, but it's also demanding and challenging. And burnout is a real thing in this profession.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you brought that up, and I'm glad that you felt like you could bring it up, here and say, hey, I just want to step back, because sometimes it's okay to do that. Doesn't mean you're
Yeah.
quitting.
No, but I think, and you've probably found the same, that the type of people that work in these professions all kind of have similar personalities as well. I think we're drawn to these professions.
Right.
So my entire life I have been your typical type A,
Yep.
overachiever, perfectionist type of person, that for me, pulling back does feel like I am quitting, or I'm surrendering. I'm waving the white flag. I can't do it anymore. But as you've touched on, as we get older, you start to realize that that's actually
Yeah.
okay and that's necessary.
You have to. I have more fun now giving back in different ways. I still train athletes. I don't train the quantity or the I purposely stay away from, unless it's a specific thing someone wants me for, elite level athletes. I'm more junior level and those, because right now I feel like that's where my skill set is needed.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
think a lot of coaches would feel that. That's where you're going to make the biggest improvements, is the developing athletes.
right. So, and then I talk a lot to parents and organizations that work with athletes, just to get them to kind of understand what the profession is about. And, if you come to me as a physio, you're supposed to be value added. You don't want to take over training my athlete.
No.
Same way as if I come to you as a strength coach, I'm not trying to tell you how to, deal with injuries or anything like that. We have to take a little bit of the animosity out of the profession, so that we all have egos. I mean, you're not getting under a bar to try to push some weight if you didn't have just a little bit of ego.
Yeah.
Okay. If you get under there, you better feel like you can do it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's no chance. You're not getting it off the floor.
Exactly.
But by the same token, we have to understand that ego that we take in our own competitive nature, competition is good until it's not. That's what I say.
Yeah.
Competition is great, man. Let's get in here. Let's compete, but let's not take it too far, because it is what it is. It's at some point we have to realize that it's not, if you miss, 75 kilos, that's not going to be the end of the world. You're not going to like it, but it's not going to be the end of the world.
No.
And it's the same thing. If the athlete comes to us and they want our input, it's not our job to downgrade the other coach or whatever or whoever. It's just say, hey, this is what I think.
Yeah.
And then kind of go from there. So I always get to this point in our conversations at about the hour mark. I look at the clock and I go, come on, I got some more questions, but we don't have time, or production people get mad at me. They say you went over 60 minutes. I'm like, I only went 10 minutes over. It was only 35 minutes. No, but I am glad that you answered the call. I appreciate you coming on.
Again, thank you for inviting me on. That's good.
It's been a great conversation, but don't feel like you can't drop us a note. Let us know what's going on with you and where you're from and or where you're going, and don't be surprised if you hear from us again saying, "Hey, you got to come back on and tell us what you're doing now."
I'd love that. I could talk about this sort of stuff for hours. So.
Oh, then we're going to put you on because we got to. No, I'm just kidding. But no, we like to keep up with people who have guests on the show, along with keeping a variety and number of guests coming through. We like to reach back sometimes and say, hey, let's go see what Sarah's doing.
Yeah, I would love that.
So again, you can look forward to hearing from us, or if you're doing something you think is interesting and you want to get that word out, drop us a note.
Absolutely will. And in the meantime, we can both work on some sort of institution that brings all of the professions together.
Everybody together in a big, ice cream eating, candy canes, cotton candy. Yeah.
A performance party. Sounds good.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll work on that.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been, oh man, I'm going to mess this up. This has been Performance Talk with Sarah. No, I'm not saying it. Say your last name.
Trifogli.
Trifogli, yeah.
I'm sure you were close.
I don't know. If it came out of my mouth, it might not have been right. But this has been Performance Talk, and we're out. We thank you, Sarah.
Thank you very much.